Well, once again, you guys have blown me away with your staggering amount of responses to my stories. There is no way I can respond to each of you individually, so I'm just going to address some common things again, and then move on to the stories. I'm going to write as many as I can think of in addition to my friend's story. I will probably not update again until I get the chance to answer some questions that I myself have for my superiors. Right, so the common questions I found you all had. I'm not comfortable talking about where exactly I work, unfortunately. In all reality, some of the things I mentioned here could get me in a lot of trouble with fire, so it's best if I just don't discuss too much. I will say that I'm in the United States and in an area that is compromised of a great deal of wilderness. We're talking hundreds of miles of thick forest with a mountain range and a few lakes. There's still a great amount of interest in the stairs, and luckily for you guys, my friend has a story that I think you'll all be very interested in. I'll go into that more at the end of this update. As for whether or not I have ever thought of asking my superiors about them, I have, but again, I don't want to risk my job. However, one of my former superiors no longer works as a search and rescue officer, and it's possible that he may be willing to talk to me about it. I'll be speaking to him later in the week, and I will let you all know what comes of that. As far as advice on becoming a search and rescue officer goes, I think the best advice I can give is to contact your local Forest Service office and see if they offer an training courses or what the qualifications are. I've been doing this for years and I started out as a volunteer helping on SAR operations. It's a great job despite the occasional tragic situations, and I wouldn't want to do anything else. Alright, let's move on to the stories. The first happened on a case that I went out on right after I got out of training, and was still pretty new to everything. Before I took this job, I was a volunteer, so I had a basic idea of what to expect, but on those calls, you're mostly dealing with finding lost people after vets have found signs of them. As a search and rescue officer, you go out for all kinds of cases, from animal bites to heart attacks. This case got called in early in the morning from a young couple who were up on one of the trails that goes by the lake. The husband was completely hysterical, and we couldn't really figure out what was going on. We could hear the woman screaming in the background, and he was begging us to come up there right away. When we get there, we see him holding his wife, and she's got something in her arms. She's screaming these awful, almost animal-like screams, and he's sobbing. He sees us, and he screams at us to help them, to please get an ambulance up there. Now, obviously, we can't just drive an ambulance up the walking path, so we ask him if his wife needs help, or if she can walk on her own. He's still hysterical, but he manages to tell us that it's not his wife that needs help. I go over while one of the vets tries to calm him down, then I ask what the wife what's going on. She's rocking, holding something and just shrieking over and over. I crouch down and see that whatever she's holding, it's covering her with blood. That's when I notice the sling on her front and my heart sinks. I ask her to tell me what's going on, and I sort of pry her arms gently open so I can see what she's holding. It's her baby, obviously dead. His head is caved in on one side, and he's covered in scratches. Now, I've seen dead bodies before, but something about this whole situation hits me hard. I have to take a second to compose myself, and I get up and go to one of the other vets and get them, who's standing by. I tell him that it's a dead kid, and he sort of pats my shoulder and tells me he'll deal with it. It took us over an hour to get this woman to let us see our kid. Every time we try to take him from her, she flips out and tells us we can't have him, and that it'll be okay if we just leave her alone and let her help him. But eventually, one of the vets manages to calm her down, and she gives us the body. We took it back to the med area, and when the EMTs showed up, they told us that there was never any hope of saving the kid. He died instantly from the trauma to his head. I was good buddies with one of the nurses who met them at the hospital. She told me later what had happened. Turns out the couple had been waiting with the baby in the sling, and then they stopped because the kid was fuzzing. The dad takes the kid and is holding him, looking out over this little gully by the path. The mom comes to stand next to him, but she ends up stepping on a loose patch of soil, and she trips. She falls into the dad, who drops the kid, who ends up falling about 20 feet down this little gully onto the rocks at the bottom. The dad climbed down and recovered the kid, but he'd fallen right on his head, and was dead by the time he got there. The baby was only about 15 months old. It was a total freak accident, a series of events that coalesced into the worst possible outcome. Probably one of the most awful calls I've been on. I haven't seen a lot of animal bites in my time as a search and rescue officer, mostly because there aren't that many animals that come around the area. While there are bears in the area, they tend to stay pretty far away from people, and sightings are highly unusual. Most of the animals you'll see are small ones like coyotes, raccoons, or skunks. What we do see frequently though are moose, and let me tell you, moose are nasty fuckers. They'll chase after anything for any reason, and God help you if you get in between a baby and its female. One of the more amusing calls was of a guy who got chased down by an absolutely massive male moose and was stuck up a tree. It took us almost an hour to get him down. When he was finally on solid ground again, he looks at me and says, "God damn, them fuckers is big up close." I guess that's not really a scary story, but we still laugh about that one. I honestly don't know how I'd forgotten this story, but it is by far the scariest thing that's happened to me. I guess maybe I've tried so long to forget about it that it just didn't come to mind right away. As someone who spends literally all their time in the woods, you don't ever want to let yourself get scared of being alone. Or out in the middle of nowhere. That's why when you have experiences like this, you tend to just forget about them and move on. This is, to date, the only thing that's ever really made me consider if this job is the right one for me. I don't really like talking about it much, but I'll do the best I can to remember it all. As I recall, this took place right at the end of spring. It was a typical lost child call. A 4-year-old girl had wandered away from her family's campsite and had been missing for about 2 hours. Her parents were completely despondent and told us what most parents do. "My kids will never wander away. She's so good about staying close. She's never done anything like this before." We assure the parents that we'll do everything we can to find her, and we spread out in a standard search formation. I was partnered with one of my good buddies, and we were sort of casually holding conversation while we hiked. I know it sounds callous, but you do sort of become desensitized when you've done this long enough. It becomes the norm, and I think to a certain extent you have to learn to desensitize yourself in order to work this job. We search for a good 2 hours, going well beyond where we think she'd be, and we come out of a small valley when something makes us both stop in unison. We freeze and look at each other, and there's almost a sensation like a plane depressurizing. My ears pop, and I have this odd sensation of having dropped about 10 feet. I start to ask my buddy if he felt that, but before I can, we hear the loudest sound I ever heard in my life. It's almost like a freight train passing directly by us, but it's coming from every direction at once, including above and below us. He screams something to me, but I can't hear him over the deafening roar. Understandably freaked out, we look all around us trying to find the source of the sound, but neither of us sees anything. Of course, my first thought is a landslide, but we're not near any cliffs, and even if we were, we would have hit us by now. The sound goes on, and we're trying to yell at each other, but even standing close together we can't hear anything but the sound. Then suddenly as it starts, it stops, like someone threw a switch and cut it off. We stand there for a second perfectly still. Slowly the normal sounds of the woods come back. He asked me what the fuck just happened, but I just kind of shrugged. We stand there looking at each other for a minute. I get on the radio and asked if anyone else heard the end of the fucking world, but no one else hears it. And even though we were all within shouting distance of each other, my buddy and I just sort of shrug it off and keep going. About an hour later, we all check on the radios. No one's found the little girl. Most of the time we won't search when it gets dark, but because we don't have any kind of lead on her, a few of us decide to keep going, including me and my buddy. We keep close together and we're calling out for her every couple of minutes. At this point, I'm hoping beyond hope that we find her, because while I may not like kids, the idea of them being out alone in the dark is awful. The woods can be intimidating to kids in the daylight. At night, well, it's a whole different beast, but we're not seeing any signs of her getting any responses, and around midnight we decide to turn around and head back to the rendezvous point. We're about halfway back when my buddy stops and shines the light to the right of us into a really thick deadfall, or a group of dead trees. I asked him if he's heard a response, but he just tells me to be quiet for a second and listen. I do, and in the distance I can hear what sounds like a kid crying. We both call the girl's name and listen for any kind of response, but it's just this really faint crying. We head in the direction of this deadfall and go around it, calling her name over and over. As we get closer to the crying, I start getting this weird feeling in my gut. And I tell my buddy that something isn't right. He tells me he feels the same way, but we can't figure out what it is. We stop where we are and call the girl's name again, and at the same time, we both figure it out. The crying is on a loop. It's the same little hitching sob, then wail, then quiet hiccup, repeated over and over. It's exactly the same every time, and without saying another word, we both take off running. It's the only time I've ever lost my composure like that, but something about it was so incredibly wrong. Neither of us wanted to stay out there anymore. When we got back to the rendezvous, we asked if anyone else had heard anything strange, but no one else knew what we were talking about. I know it sort of sounds anticlimactic, but that call fucked me up for a long time. As for the little girl, we never found a trace of her. We keep an eye out for her and all the other people who we've never found, but frankly I doubt we'll ever find anything. Of the missing persons calls I've gone out on, only a handful have ever resulted in a complete disappearance, meaning no trace of the person and no body ever found. But sometimes finding a body just leads to more questions than answers. Here are some of the bodies that we found that have become infamous in our team. A teenage boy's whose remains were recovered almost a year after he vanished. We found the top of his skull, 2 finger bones, and his camera almost 40 miles from where he was last seen. The camera, sadly, was destroyed. The pelvis of an older man who had vanished a month earlier. That was all we found. The lower jaw and right foot of a 2-year-old boy on the highest peak of a ridge in the southern part of the park. The body of a 10-year-old girl with Down syndrome almost 20 miles where she vanished. She had died of exposure 3 weeks after going missing, and all her clothes were intact except for her shoes and jacket. There were berries and cooked meat in her stomach when they did the autopsy. The coroner said it appeared as if someone had been taking care of her. There were no suspects ever identified. The frozen body of a 1-year-old baby found a week after vanishing in the hollow trunk of a tree 10 miles from the area he was last seen. There was fresh milk found in his stomach, but his tongue was gone. A single vertebrae in a right kneecap of a 3-year-old girl found in the snow almost 20 miles from the campground her family had been at the previous summer. Now onto a couple of the stories my friend told me. I mentioned that you were all interested in the stairs, and you're in luck. He's had a closer encounter with them. Though he doesn't have any explanation for them, he does have a bit more experience with them than I do. My buddy has been a search and rescue officer for about 7 years. He started when he was a junior in college, and he had a very similar experience when he first encountered the stairs. His trainer told him almost the same thing mine did, which was never to go near, touch, or ascend them. For the first year he did just that. But apparently his curiosity got the better of him, and on one call he broke away from the line and went to check a set of them out. He said they were about 10 miles from the path where a teenage girl had vanished, and the dogs were following a scent. He was on his own, lagging behind the main group, when he saw a set of stairs to his left. They looked like they were from a new house because the carpeting was pristine and white. He said that as he got closer, he didn't feel any different or hear any weird noises. He was expecting something to happen, like bleeding from his ears or collapsing. But he got right up next to them and didn't feel anything. The only thing he said that was odd that there was absolutely no debris on the steps. No dirt, leaves, dust, anything. And there didn't appear to be signs of animal or insect activity in the immediate area, which he found strange. It was like things were avoiding them, and more like they just happened to be in a relatively barren path of the forest. He touched the stairs and didn't feel anything except that sort of sticky feeling you get from a new carpet. Making sure his radio was on, he slowly climbed the stairs. He said it was terrifying because the way they had been stigmatized. He wasn't really sure what was going to happen to him. He joked that half of him expected to be teleported to some other dimension and the other half was watching for a UFO to come swooping down. But he got to the top with a little event, and he stood there looking around. But he said, the longer he stood on the top step, the more he felt like he was doing something very, very wrong. He described it as the feeling you'd get if you were in a part of a government building you have no business being in. And as if someone was going to come in and arrest you, or shoot you in the back of the head at any second. He tried to brush it off, but the feeling got stronger and stronger. That's when he realized that he couldn't hear anything anymore. The sounds of the forest were gone, and he couldn't hear his own breathing. It was like some kind of weird, awful tinnitus, but more oppressive. He climbed back down and rejoined the search and didn't mention what he'd done. But he said the weirdest part came after. His trainer was back at the welcome center after search had ended that day, and he cornered my buddy before he could leave. He said his trainer had this look of intense anger, and he asked what was wrong. "You went up them, didn't you?" My buddy said it wasn't a phrase as a question. He asked how his trainer knew. The trainer just shook his head. "Because we didn't find her. The dogs lost their scent." My buddy asked what that had to do with anything. The trainer asked how long he'd been on the stairs, and my buddy said no more than a minute. The trainer gave him this really awful, almost dead-eyed look and told him that if he ever went up another set of stairs again, he'd be fired. Immediately, the trainer walked away, and I guess he's never answered any of the questions my buddy has asked him about him since. My buddy has been involved in a lot of missing persons cases where there's never been a trace of them found. I mentioned David Paulides, and my buddy said he can confirm that those stories are, for the most part, accurate. He said that most of the time, if the person isn't found right away, they're either never found or they're found weeks, months, or years later in places they can't possibly have gone into. One of the stories that really stood out to me that he told me was one that involved a 5-year-old boy with severe mental disability. The little boy vanished from a picnic area in the late fall. In addition to the mental disability, he was also physically handicapped, and his parents explained over and over that he simply could not have vanished. It was impossible. Someone had to have taken him. My buddy said they searched this kid for weeks, going miles out of the accepted range, but it was like he'd never been there. Dogs couldn't pick up his scent anywhere, not even in the picnic area where he apparently vanished from. Suspicion fell on the parents, but it was pretty clear that they were devastated and hadn't done anything sinister to the kid. And the search was concluded about a month later, and my buddy said everyone had pretty much forgotten about it by later in the winter. He was out on a training operation in the snow on one of the higher peaks when he came across something in the snow. He said he saw it from far away at first, and when he got closer, he realized it was a shirt, frozen and sticking partway out of the powder. He recognized it as belonging to the kid because it had a distinctive pattern. About 20 yards away, he found the kid's body laying partially buried in the snow. My buddy said that there was no way the kid had been dead for any more than a few days, even though he had been missing for almost 3 months. The kid was curled around something, and when my buddy brushed off the snow to see what it was, he said he almost couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was a big chunk of ice that had been carved crudely to look sort of like a person. The kid was holding it so tight that it had frostbitten his chest and hand, which my buddy could tell even with the decay that had taken place. He radioed the rest of the crews, and they took the body off the mountain. Now he recapped all of this for me, and to put it simply, there's no way this kid could have both survived for almost 3 months on his own, or have gotten to this peak. There's no physical way this child could have walked almost 50 miles and ended up on the top of a goddamn mountain. To top it off, there was nothing in this kid's stomach or colon. Nothing. Not even water. It was like my buddy said, the kid had been taken off the face of the earth, put in suspended animation, and dropped on this mountain months later, only to die of exposure. He's never really gotten over that one. The last story I'll share from him was one that took place relatively recently, only a few months ago. They were out doing recon for mountain lions because there had been several reports of sightings in the last couple of days. One of our jobs is to scout out the areas where these animals are seen to ensure that if they are in the area that we can warn people and close off the trails. He was out on his own way in a heavily forested part of the park towards dusk when he heard what sounded like a woman screaming in the distance. Now, as most of you know, when a mountain lion screams, it sounds almost exactly like a woman being brutally murdered. It's unsettling, but far from abnormal. My buddy radioed back and let his ops know that he had heard one, and that he was going to keep going to see if he could figure out where its territory started. He heard the mountain lion scream a couple more times, always from the same spot, and determined that the approximate area of the mountain lion territory. He was about to head back when he heard another scream, this time within only a few yards from him. Of course, he freaks out and starts heading back at a much faster pace, because the last thing he wants is to run into a goddamn mountain lion and get mauled to death. As he got back onto the path and started heading back, the screaming followed him, and he broke into a jog. When he was a mile away from operations, the screaming stopped, and he turned around to see if it was following him. It was almost night by this point, but he said in the distance, just before the path rounded a corner, he could see what looked like a male figure. He called out to them, warning them that the paths were closed and that he needed to come back to the welcome center. The figure just stood there, and my buddy started to walk over. When he was about 10 yards away, the figure took, as he described, an impossibly long step towards him and let out the same scream my buddy had been hearing. My buddy didn't even say anything, he just turned and sprinted back to operations, never looking behind him. By the time he got back, the screaming had moved back into the woods. He didn't mention it to anyone else, just said that there was a mountain lion in the area and that they would need to close those paths until the animal could be located and moved. I'm going to end this entry here, and since it turned into a huge wall of text, I'm going to be heading out on a yearly training operation tomorrow. So I'll be gone until early next week. I'll be meeting with a lot of former trainers and buddies who work in other areas of the park, and I'll be asking around about any stories they'd like to share. I'm so glad you guys have been interested in my stories, and once I'm back from this operation, I'll continue to share them. Hey guys, I'm back from my training operation, and I have a lot of really interesting stories to share with you. I've got enough that I'm going to break them up into 2 parts, this being the first. I'd love to put them all in one entry, but I haven't had a chance to write them all down yet. I didn't have anything too crazy happen while I was out there, but we did have one incident with a rookie that I found relevant. Since I'm sure you guys have been waiting for these, I'll just get right into the stories. I'll assign each one a batch of these stories to the person who told it to me. KD. KD is a vet who's been a search and rescue officer for about 15 years. She specializes in high elevation mountain rescues and is widely considered one of the best in her field. She was one of the more enthusiastic storytellers, and since we were together a fair amount during exercises, she ended up telling me about 4 that really stuck with me. The first she told me in response to me asking her about her most traumatic calls. She shook her head and told me that really bad calls happen more frequently on the mountain, since the potential for nasty accidents is higher. About 5 years ago, one of the parks she worked at had a string of disappearances. It was a bad year, she said. One of the worst on record as far as weather went. They were getting about a foot of new snow every couple of days, and there were a few avalanches that killed some climbers. They had warned people about staying on the mapped areas, but of course there was always those who didn't listen. In one particularly nasty case, an entire family got wiped out because the father decided he knew better than the officials, and he took them out into an area that wasn't safe. They were snowshoeing, and as best KD could figure, they had walked onto a shelf of snow that looked solid but actually wasn't. It gave away, and this family went ass over tea kettle almost 300 feet down a slope. They landed on the rocks at the bottom, and the parents died instantly. One of the kids did as well, but the other 2 survived. One had a broken leg and fractured ribs, and the other was almost unharmed save for some bruising and a sprained ankle. Then an injured child left his sibling behind and set out to find help. KD said the kid didn't make it more than half a mile before a storm overtook him. Kid stopped to try and get warm or maybe just to rest and ended up freezing to death. They ended up finding this family with the help of some witnesses who saw them heading out into the wilderness, and she was the one to find the kid who was frozen to death looking for help. She said it had started to snow, just enough to obscure long distance vision, but not enough to make searching impossible. She saw a figure sitting up in the snow ahead, and she got to it as quickly as possible. She described in detail how as she got closer, she realized that it was a child, second that they were deceased, and third that they had frozen in one of the most pitiful positions she's ever found a corpse in. The kid was sitting upright with his knees tucked up against his chest. His arms were curled around them, and his head was tucked up in his coat. When she moved the coat to look at his face, she saw that he died crying. His face was twisted, and the tears were frozen on his cheeks. She said it was painfully obvious that the kid was terrified when he succumbed to hypothermia, and as a mother, it broke her heart. She told me repeatedly that she hopes the father is burning in hell as we speak. The other traumatic story that she told me that stood out in my mind was one that happened when she was a rookie. Her team got a report of an experienced climber who hadn't come home the previous day. His wife was convinced something bad had happened because he never failed to come home on time. They went out looking for him and had to climb what sounded like some very technically challenging parts of the mountain. They got to a relatively flat area and KD started seeing blood on the snow. She followed the trail, and as she went, she started seeing little bits of tissue. She wasn't exactly sure what body part it had come from, but the farther she followed it, the more there was. She follows this blood and tissue trail into a sheltered area under a cliff face, and she finds a climber. She said there was so much blood, more than she had ever seen before. He was lying face down, one arm stretched in front of him, as if he had died crawling. She looks closer and sees that he had basically been disemboweled, which is where the tissue she had seen was coming from. The guy has an ice pick tucked under a hip holster and it's covered in blood. Of course, they'll never be exactly sure what happened, but she said as best as she can figure, this is what went down. The guy had been attempting to climb up to the next area and had been using his ice axe to ascend. He probably hit a loose patch and had fallen. On the way down, or possibly when he landed, he got impaled by the axe, and it had disemboweled him. He dragged himself along, tearing pieces of himself out as he went, and had died under that cliff face. She isn't terribly bothered by gore, but I guess a few of the guys who came to help her remove the body threw up when they turned him over and a good portion of his intestines spilled out. I mentioned to her that I was interested in hearing about any experiences she had with people completely disappearing. Her eyes lit up, and she leans in close to me. "Want to hear a real doozy?" she asks. She tells me about how when she first started, there was a case that got a lot of attention from the media. A family had been out berry picking in the area of the forest very close to the entrance of the park. They had 2 little boys, both under the age of 5, and at some point during the day, one of them vanishes. There's an absolutely massive search, and they find absolutely nothing. It's another one of those cases where it's like the kid was never there in the first place. The dogs just sit down and don't pick up on anything. No trace of the kid is found. The search goes on for about 2 months, but it's eventually called off. Fast forward to 6 months later, the family comes back to place flowers at the memorials that have been set up for the kid. They bring the other son, and while they're placing the flowers, they lose sight of the kid for about 3 seconds. In that span of time, he vanishes into thin air. Now obviously the parents are beyond devastated. It's awful enough to lose 1 child, but to lose 2 is beyond imagining. The search is huge, one of the largest in state history. There are about 300 volunteers combing every inch of this park, looking for the kid. But again, there's no trace of him. The search goes on for about a week, with people looking miles from the part of the park he vanished from. And then, almost 2 weeks later, a volunteer almost 15 miles from the designated search area radios that he's found the kid. They assume the kid was dead, but the volunteer says he's not only alive, he's in good shape. Katie and her team go out to recover the kid. When they get there, she can't believe that this is the kid that has been missing. His clothes are clean, there's no dirt on him anywhere, and he doesn't appear traumatized. The volunteer says he found the kid sitting on a log playing with a little twig bundle that's bound together with some old rope. Katie asks where he's been and who is he with for these 2 weeks, and the kid tells her that he's been with a fuzzy man. Now Katie firmly believes in Bigfoot, so she gets all excited and asks what he means by fuzzy. Was he hairy? But the kid says no, he wasn't hairy, he was a fuzzy man, and he describes a man that's blurry, like when you close your eyes but not all the way closed. He says the man came out of the trees and took the kid with him deep into the woods. The kid says he slept on a hollow tree and the fuzzy man gave him berries to eat. Katie asks if the man was mean, if he scared the kid, and the kid says no, he wasn't scary, but I didn't like how he didn't have eyes. Katie says they get the kid back to headquarters and a cop takes him into town to talk to him more about what happened. She's friends with the cop that talked to him, and she said the kid described being kept in this tree by the fuzzy man and given berries whenever he was hungry. He was allowed to wander around a very specific clearing, but when he tried to go further, the fuzzy man would get mad and yell real loud even though he didn't have a mouth. When the kid got scared at night, the fuzzy man made it go brighter and gave him the twig bundle. He said the fuzzy man was going to keep him, but he had to let him go because the kid wasn't the right kind. He either can't or won't elaborate more on that. The cops are just sort of left scratching their heads, and the search for his brother is renewed with no results. The kid has no idea where his brother might be, and they never find him. The last story that Katie told me was something that happened to her when she got separated from her training group when she was a rookie. They were learning the basics of high elevation belaying on a well-mapped side of the mountain, and she had to use the bathroom. She went off about 50 yards from the group during a meal break and did her business. I'll tell the rest exactly how she told it to me. So I go to take a piss, and once I'm done, I start going back to the group. But I've only gotten about 5 feet when I realize I have no idea where I am. This wasn't a, oh, I got turned around lost. I mean, I had literally no fucking clue where I was. And if you'd asked me, I don't even think I'd have been able to tell you what state we were in. It was sort of how I imagine people with amnesia feel, you know? You're completely lost and you have no idea what to do. So I stood there for a while, just trying to figure out where the fuck I was and what I was supposed to do. But the longer I stand there, the more confused and turned around I get. So I started walking. As I recall, I just picked up a random direction and went for it. And as I'm walking, it's just getting worse and worse to the point where I have no concept of why I'm on the mountain in the first place. I'm just trudging through the snow. And then I start hearing this voice. It's kind of inside my head, almost like if a frog could talk, all low and croaky. It's telling me over and over, it's okay, you need to find something to eat. Find something to eat and you'll be okay. Just keep walking and find something to eat. Eat. So I start looking around for anything that I can eat, and I swear to God, I've never felt that hungry in my whole life. It was bottomless. I think I'd have eaten just about anything you put in front of me then. I had no concept of time, so I had no idea how long I'd been out there, and when I hear an actual voice coming towards me, I go towards it and see one of the other search and rescue officers, and he looks fucking terrified. He's running towards me, asking if I'm okay and what the hell I'm doing out here. The scary thing is, he's running towards me. I kind of see myself reaching into my belt for my hunting knife, and I'm not even really thinking what I'm doing. But what I'm thinking is that I have to eat. If I don't eat, I'll never be okay again. So I just have to eat. He sees me doing that and he backs off right away. He yells at me to put my knife away and that he's not gonna hurt me. And that kind of snaps me back. All of a sudden, I know exactly where I am. I put the knife away, I run to him and ask him how long I've been gone. Thinking he'll tell me I've been gone for a half an hour or so. But he tells me I've been gone for 2 fucking days. I've gone over 2 peaks and ended up on almost the other side of the mountain. And if I kept going, I would have ended up wandering into about 300 miles of wilderness. They never have found me. I can't believe I'm not dead, and of course I don't know what the fuck to think. To me, no time has passed at all. I don't say anything. I just go back with him to the rendezvous point, and I'm taken back to HQ to be airlifted to the hospital. When I get there, they do all kinds of tests. They try to figure out what happened, as best as they can guess. I had some kind of weird fugue state, which is kind of like amnesia, or a weird seizure that knocked my brain out of whack. But the truth is, we really don't know. It never happened again, but I'll tell you, ever since then, I never go out there alone. People rag on me for making them come with me and when I had to leave the group, but I just tell them that listening to me piss in the snow is better than losing me for 2 fucking days on a freezing mountain. EW. The next person I talked to was EW, a former trainer who now works as an EMT. He still comes to the operation like this to help out, but doesn't work full time for us anymore. He specialized in finding lost kids. He just seemed to have a sixth sense when it came to knowing where they'd gone. He's a legend among the more senior veterans, but he gets embarrassed if you compliment him on his work. He sat down with me at dinner one evening and we ended up swapping stories. Most of them were just casual, but when we got on the subject of our weirder calls, I mentioned that I'd had a buddy who'd gone up a set of stairs. He kind of got quiet and asked me if I had heard of a little boy who disappeared from his park a few years back. I hadn't, so he told me this story. They were out looking for this 11-year-old boy, Joey, who had gone missing near a river. Of course, the first thought that was that he'd fallen in and drowned, but when they brought the dogs out, they led search and rescue officers away from the river and up into a densely forested area. When we do searches for people, we search in a grid pattern, and we search every box of the grid incredibly thorough. What EW's team noticed right away was that a very strange pattern was emerging. Dogs in alternating boxes were picking up Joey's scent, but losing it when they overlapped with another box. If you think of a checkerboard, Joey's scent was picked up in the random black squares, but never in red. This, of course, didn't make any sense, because how could the kid bounce from area to area without leaving a scent in each place he passed? EW and his partner pass into a new box of the grid, and EW notices a set of stairs about 50 yards away. He tells his partners that they need to go check it, but his partner flat out refuses. He tells EW that he made a point to never go near any stairs he sees, and that while it may be routine, he's not to pretend that it's normal. He tells EW that he'll wait in sight while EW checks. EW says he was irritated, but he felt for the guy, and didn't push him on the subject. I walked over to the stairs. They were small, kind of like stairs into a basement. I don't really feel strongly one way or another about them, the stairs I mean, so I wasn't scared or anything. I guess I'm like everyone else, and I just prefer not to think about them too much. Anyways, I went over and I could see that there was something lying on the bottom step, sort of curled up. My heart sinks because, of course, you always hope for the best, but we were confident that we'd find this kid alive, because he'd only been missing for a few hours, but I knew right away that it was him, that he was dead. He was curled up in a little ball on the step, holding his stomach. It looked like he had been in horrible pain when he died, but I didn't see any blood except some on his lips and chin. I radioed in that I found him and we got his body back to command. That poor family, they were devastated. The parents couldn't understand how he'd be dead because he'd only been gone for such a short amount of time. And on top of that, we didn't have any obvious cause of death, which made it worse. I figured he'd probably eaten something poisonous since he was holding his stomach when I found him, but I didn't want to guess. It's hard enough to hear that your kid is dead, let alone have some stupid search and rescue guy guessing about what happened. They took him away and I went home and tried not to think about it. I hate finding dead kids, man. I love this job, but it's one of the reasons I left. I've got 2 daughters and the thought of losing them that way just... He choked up a little here. I'm not great with emotional stuff like that, and it's always sort of awkward to see a grown man cry, so I didn't really know what to do. He pulled himself together eventually though, and he kept going. We don't always hear back from the coroners about cause of death. It's not really our job to know, I guess. And sometimes if they think it's foul play, they won't tell us because of legal bullshit. But I've got a friend who works for the sheriff's department, and he'll usually pass along any interesting info I ask. In this case though, I actually got a call from him about a week later. He asked if I remember the kid, and of course I do. He says some seriously weird shit is going on. He tells me, EW, man, you're gonna think I'm crazy, but the coroner has no idea what happened to this kid. He's never seen anything like it. My friend goes on to tell me that when the coroner opened this kid up, he couldn't even believe what he was seeing. The kid's organs were like Swiss cheese. Quarter-sized holes were punched clean through just about every single organ this kid had, aside from his heart and lungs. But his colon, his stomach, his kidneys, even one of his testicles were full of these clean holes. My friend said that the coroner described it as if someone had taken a hole punch and punched holes out of everything. They were so neat. But the kid didn't have a scratch on him. No entry or exit wound. The closest anyone there had ever seen, like, it was a guy who filled himself full of buckshot a year or so back while cleaning his rifle. No one had a clue what could have possibly caused it. My friend asked me if I ever heard anything like it, or if we'd had similar cases in the past, but I never even heard of anything like that. And I told him I wasn't going to be any help of him. As far as I know, the coroner determined the cause of death as something like massive internal bleeding, but no one really knows what happened. I've never been able to forget that kid. I have nightmares about it sometimes. I don't let my kids go into the woods alone, and when we go together, I never let them out of my sight. I used to love it out here, but that case and a couple of others, it sort of just ruined it for me. Dinner was over, so we started to clean up and go back to our cabins. Before we went our separate ways, he put his hand on my shoulder and looked at me really close. He tells me that there's bad things out there. Things that don't care if we have families or lives, or that we can think and feel. He tells me to be careful, and he walks away. I didn't have a chance to talk to him again, but that story stuck with me. PB. By pure coincidence, I got to talk to another vet, PB, who's been in the search and rescue field for a few years. We were partnered on a grid sweep during a training exercise, and we were chatting casually about how we liked the job and what kind of things we've seen and the like. At one point, we passed an old set of stairs, though these were probably from an old fire lookout, given the area they were in. I sort of casually mentioned that I was curious about the stairs and that I wish I knew more about them. He got kind of quiet and looked like he wanted to tell me something, but wasn't sure if he should. Finally, he told me to turn my radio off. Obviously, this is something we are never ever supposed to do, but I did it and he did the same. About 7 years ago, he tells me he was out on a call with a rookie. They were in an area of a park that had a lot of strange reports and events, disappearances, stories about lights in the forest, odd noises, things like that. The rookie was totally spooked and kept going on and on about things out in the wood. According to PB, the guy wouldn't stop talking about the goat man, just on and on. Goat man this, goat man that. Finally, I told him that there was plenty else to be afraid out here that was very real, and that he'd better get over this thing with the goat man. The rookie wanted to know what kinds of things I was talking about, and I just told him to shut up and walk. We crested a little ridge, and there was a staircase about 10 yards ahead. The rookie stops dead in his tracks and just stands there looking at them. I tell him, "See? That's something you should be afraid of." The rookie asks me what the hell these are doing out here, and for some reason, I just open up and tell him the truth. Or what I've been told is the truth. I could have gotten in a lot of trouble for doing what I did, and I could get in a lot of trouble for repeating it to you, but you're a nice kid. I want you to stop looking into this. Quit while you're ahead. So I'll tell you what I know, under the condition that you never breathe a word of this to the soups. I told him I wouldn't say a word, and he double checks that our radios are off. When I first started out, we were a little less tight-lipped about them, and other things that happen out here. We warned people before they were even hired that there was weird shit going on. I guess the Forest Service was tired of having such a massive turnover rate and they wanted people to know what they were getting into. So they started having people sign these agreements that they wouldn't go into the media about what they were going to see. The Forest Service didn't want to scare people away, so the last thing they needed were spooked rookies running off to the media with stories of ghosts and haunted stairs. But eventually they found that the agreements weren't necessary. People not only didn't want to talk about what they saw, they wouldn't. A few times, media tried to talk to people when kids and hikers would disappear, and no one would say a word. I can't really explain it. I guess we just don't really want to admit anything is wrong. This is our job, to be out in the woods every single day. We don't need to be spooked. And the best way to avoid that is to pretend like everything's okay. So I'll tell you everything I can think of, and after that, I'm done talking about it for good. And I expect you not to bring it out around me, ever. The stairs have been out here for as long as the parks have existed. We have records going back decades describing them. Sometimes people go up them and nothing happens. Other times, look, I really don't like talking about this, but sometimes really bad shit happens. I saw one guy get his hand sliced clean off when he got to the top step. He reached out to touch a tree branch, and it happened so fast. 1 second his hand was there, and the next it was gone. Completely clean wound. We didn't find his hand, and the guy almost died. Another time, a woman touched one of the stairs, and a blood vessel in her brain exploded. Literally exploded, like a water balloon. She sort of stumbled down and came over to me, and all she got out was, "I think something is wrong with me." She dropped like a sack of flour, dead before she hit the ground. I'll never forget the way the blood leaked inside of her eye. Before she died, I watched it turn red. I watched it happen, and there wasn't a single thing I could do to help. We warn people not to go anywhere near them, but there's always at least one idiot who does. And even if nothing happens to them, something bad always happens. Kids go missing as we're on their trail, someone dies the next day, cut in half in a completely safe part of the park. I don't know why. Something bad always happens. I don't know exactly why they're out there, but it doesn't matter. They're here, and if we're smart, we tell our new officers exactly what they're capable of. We were both quiet for a little while. I was afraid to talk because I wasn't sure if he was done. He looked like he wanted to say something else. Finally spoke up again. Have you ever noticed how you can't find the same ones twice? I nodded, expecting him to continue, but he just stayed quiet, walking alongside me. And eventually he started a story about the biggest deer he'd ever seen in the park. I didn't bring up the subject, and I didn't press him on for any stories. He dropped out of the operation the next day. Apparently he left before the sun came up. He said he was sick. None of us have heard of him since he left. I'm going to stop here for the time being. I'll try to post the next part in the coming days, but with it being the end of summer, things are pretty busy here. Thanks for the continued interest, guys. You've really awakened this curiosity in me that I didn't know I had.